The Arcem Technical Waster Sabre. Is it a great budget option for HEMA saber? Let's find out. Hi and welcome back to the Academy of Historical Fencing. I'm Nick Thomas, and in this video I'm going to give you a full in-depth review of the Arcem training sabre, synthetic or nylon sabre. I think they call it the Technical Waster, which sounds a bit sus to me, but that's the name they've given it. What is it? Is it a good thing? And do you want to buy it? So, first of all, synthetic or nylon-based training swords in HEMA have got a little bit of stigma around them, and that's because there's this feeling that you should be using steel training swords all the time. And admittedly, mostly I use steel training swords for the vast majority of my training. But there are a few issues with that. First of all, the cost of entry to steel swords is significant for the most part in HEMA, as well as durability issues, constant cleaning, additional safety equipment, all of these things. So synthetic or nylon type training swords actually have a really good place in HEMA, and that is the entry-level market and a few other elements of training such as melee combat, because melee is a little bit more chaotic, and so when we do large group melee combat we restrict it to synthetics because they are inherently a little bit safer than steel. Now, you shouldn't assume that this is a plastic toy and you can get away with just smacking people with it safely. You cannot. If you want to do truly low gear sparring, you should look to padded swords such as the Go Now foam range. But if you want to do HEMA practice that is somewhat approaching using steel swords, so a bit more realistic than using padded simulators, but a lot cheaper to get into, this is where it's at. Now, for many, many years, we used Black Fencer's range for this, which, for example, would be this is a current generation 1796 infantry V5 model, and this is a default training sword that we use a lot. I keep them in the bag as kind of, beginner training tools, melee combat, that kind of thing, and it's been really great for us. But not everybody can easily get them. Black Fencer stuff is made to order. It can be difficult to get in terms of timing, depending on where you are in the world and that kind of thing. This Arcem model has a few advantages in that regard. So you can look at the construction of it and see that it's a single piece. It's probably injection molded, I guess. It's a single piece construction. And that comes with the advantage that they can just mass manufacture them, and you can buy them in stock from Black Armory in France or swordshop.ca in Canada. I think there's probably a few other sellers as well. In terms of synthetic swords over the years, Black Fencer has been the most common one in Europe, and of course Purple Heart in the US, but we don't tend to see a lot of Purple Heart Armory products in the UK and Europe generally, because as I said, we've got options that are more accessible or cheaper to us in Europe. So I can't really compare it to the Purple Heart stuff for you, because I got some Purple Heart products, but not their sabers. Anyway, skip to today, we've still got Black Fencer around, we've still got Purple Hearts, and Arcem is now around, and you can get them from resellers. More recently, we've also had Friel Armory as well, and also Dominus Gladius, which has moved into making sort of sabers as well. So some interesting extra options. But anyway, let's just get back to the Arcem. Now, the Arcem is clearly designed after a Polish type saber, although ultimately this form of saber was really common throughout all parts of Europe. So you'll find British sabers that look exactly like this, Hungarian sabers, Austrian sabers. It was quite a generic, and French for that matter, it was quite a generic form of saber coming in around the the late 17th century and in the 18th and into the early 19th. This was still a very, very common form. So you could use this for all sorts of different saber practice, apart from that Victorian era bowl hilt type. I mean, you could still use it. There were sabers like that still around, but it's not well suited. So this is kind of your late 17th or 18th into the early 19th century type of saber. It could be used for Polish saber practice. It could be used for British saber, French saber, as I said, all these different things. And how does it weigh up? Well, in terms of its size compared to, I would say the Black Fencer 1796 is kind of a gold standard in many regards. It's just a little bit shorter by a few centimeters. The curvature is somewhat similar. There's a bit less grip space for your gloves as a result of partly their grip length, but also the P-shaped guard here. And this part is quite significant for fitting in the pinky part of your glove, in a heavy glove, for example. That's something that's worth considering later, depending on your hand size and your glove size. And now, of course, the Black Fencer has a metal hilt and separate grip wrap and that kind of thing, whereas the Arcem is single piece. And as I said, that comes with its own strengths and weaknesses, is that an injection molded component like this is always the same, everyone's identical. Black Fencer can, you know, update and change the specs and whatever as time goes by and adjust little component parts. But anyway, this isn't necessarily a direct comparison to Black Fencer, but it's going to go a little bit that way because, of course, we've been using these for about 10 years, and these are relative newcomers. Now, specification, how does it look in terms of its weight and its balance? Well, being a single piece construction and as a result having just plastic hilt fittings, it means that the weight is low but the balance is far forward. So this is around about 450 to 460 grams, as opposed to, say, that Black Fencer, which is 740. Okay, so it's quite a bit under the weight of a Black Fencer because of that hilt weight. And because of that, it doesn't just bring that weight down, the total weight, but yes, the balance goes forward. So that Black Fencer is about 11 centimeter balance, and this is pushing close to 20, okay, about 19 centimeters. So that's you know, fairly far forward for a type of, you know, cavalry-ish type saber, Polish saber. It's not unusual, but it does mean that obviously it's got more blade presence and in theory can hit a little bit harder, even though its overall total weight is a little bit lower. But again, that weight saving is here, so it's fairly far forward. Now, what that actually also means is that this feels more sword-like, more blade presence, cuttier, especially considering its total weight, than that Black Fencer does. And that, as I said, is a good or a bad thing depending on your perspective. So this one, yeah, it can feel a little bit harder on the cutting impacts. It's not significantly different, but you know, it's there. Okay, it's just worth considering. It is a little bit heavier hitting. It flexes in a pretty similar way. I haven't found the flex to be any different to the Black Fencer. What else there is to be said about it? Well, we've used it lots in sparring and we've used it lots in melee. It is rock solid. There's been no sign of damage or breakage. The edges are holding firm. This has had no edge maintenance, and I can just run my bare hand up and down it, no problem whatsoever. And because it's been modelled after a real sword, it kind of looks a bit more realistic in its individual sort of characteristics than say the Black Fencer. And yet, because it's one piece, you know, injection molded or cast type product, it also then looks a little bit fake as well because it's that one color black. So I kind of like the detailing on this better than the Black Fencer, but I prefer the overall look and the way that it looks in the fight of the Black Fencer because it looks a bit more sword-like, having that grey blade and the steel hilt components and that kind of thing. So from an aesthetic perspective, it's pluses and minuses, but I think that Black Fencer looks a little bit better. In terms of its handling characteristics, the Black Fencer is closer to the original swords because of the extra hilt weight. But at the same time, when you get into it and get into your sparring, because this has that further forward balance, it's kind of much of a muchness. They both do the job perfectly well. I'm happy with it. Now, its grip shape, I find it quite comfortable. Fortunately, they haven't gone too round, so it's much wider this way than it is this way, which is excellent because when you have grips that are basically round, like a hammer, they just turn in the hand and they don't feel comfortable. Whereas you want a grip that is essentially oval, or in this case, it's kind of rectangular with slightly rounded off edges. That's good. That helps grip retention and stops turning of the hand. Turning is in this, which is really frustrating, and you don't want to slap people with the flat of your sword. Now, going on to the sort of price point, well, this brings us back to the stigma that synthetic swords can sometimes have in HEMA and why it's a bit silly. So these swords, they're sort of 55, 60 euros, something like that, which is incredibly cheap compared to a steel sword. You know, let's say, for example, this Black Fencer 1803, which is basically an equivalent in steel terms, you're going to pay 6 times as much for that sword. And the reality is steel swords, steel training swords break all the time. There's no way to get around it. It doesn't matter who you buy them from or how well they're made. They're a consumable. They will break. And on average, I would say a good training sword from a reputable HEMA sword maker will last you about 3 years of heavy use. Obviously, if you don't use that sword too often, or you have lots of swords and use them each, a little bit at a time, or infrequently, you might get it a little bit longer. I have got swords that last longer than that, but I would say the average is about 3 years. Whereas these synthetics, whether it is Purple Heart, whether it's the Arcem or the Black Fencer, they just go on and on. It's actually very rare that they ever break. The Black Fencer, we've got about 300 of them, and I think we've broken 2 ever. That was basically a manufacturing fault that broke very, very quickly and were replaced under warranty. So in reality, synthetic swords are incredibly durable compared to their steel counterparts. So when you think, okay, a synthetic sword might be 1/5, 1/6 the price of a steel sword, you then also have to take into account how much longer it's going to have as a service life than the steel as well. And the true reality is it's probably costing you more like 1/10 of the price, maybe even 1/20th of the price if you keep doing HEMA for a long period of time over many, many years. So there is a lot to be said for not just the entry-level price of a synthetic sword, but also its durability. And then let's not forget that it has basically no maintenance as well, because there's nothing on it that rusts, okay, which is fantastic. So it means no maintenance, no hassle. Excellent. You can also then just use it in the rain. You could go and fight in a river, whatever you want to do. Plastic swords have a really good part to play in HEMA. As I said, they're not fully realistic in their binds and things like that compared to steel, sure, but they're much better than padded swords. So, is this video a little bit of a rant about why synthetic swords are actually good? Kind of. Is the Arcem a good synthetic sword? Yes. How does it compare to what's out there? I think it's very, very good. Obviously, it's one single model, there's no options available, you take what you're given, but if you're happy with this kind of Polish type look saber of this length and this balance, you're going to like it. It's a great training sword. I've got really nothing bad to say about it. As I said, just bear in that mind that all synthetic swords can hit as hard as a lightweight steel, okay? And I do mean lightweight, because people compare this all the time as to which one is safer. In reality, roughly weight for weight, the synthetic is safer. It just is. It has less issue of burrs. It spreads the impact out so it doesn't tend to find gaps in gloves so easily. It's more dependable for those scenarios where you want to do something a bit chaotic, like the melee scenario. So, for me personally, I never really use these swords anymore in a one-on-one fight. However, every single time we do melee, this is the kind of thing I'm using. So I am still using it. They are still great training swords. If you want to get into saber cheaply, you basically have got a perfect product here, and ignore the stigma, it's nonsense. So there you go, the Arcem Technical Waster Sabre. You can get it very, very quickly. There are places that stock it. As I said, Black Armory and swordshop.ca are two that I know of that tend to have stock of these. This one came from Black Armory, and it means you can get a training saber that you know is going to be good, you know is going to work very quickly, very easily, very cheaply, no maintenance. It's excellent. And as I said, if you want to go into melee type stuff, it's excellent for that. The last thing to mention is about the glove space. You can see with my hand here in terms of how much space you've got. So my hand is a typical medium. I wear medium in pretty much every brand of gloves. So there's scope here to get larger hands in, but just bear in mind, if you've got fairly bulky gloves, you're going to start to suffer. So all of the gloves that I use, so I've got Thox, I've got the impact resistant from Sabre Fencing, the HFA black prints, which are my favorites, and I've got mittens from HFA as well, and I've got Gabriel's, and all of those in the size I wear fit this. But if you, for example, use Spez Heavies, Spevies, and they're not, a smaller size, I think you're really going to struggle with this, because this is where the restriction tends to be on fitting bulky gloves into sabers, which is why it can sometimes be beneficial to flare this a little bit in the way, for example, that the British 1796 design did do. And obviously that's not why it was done historically, but it can be very handy for fitting the big gloves in. So overall, a great product. I cannot recommend it enough. It just works. It does the job fantastically well. And if you're after a synthetic saber, this one you can get quickly and easily. Go and grab it. I hope you enjoyed the video. You notice this is the first time I've done a video review here in a long time, and that's because my filming space was otherwise occupied for a long time, and it's now back in action, as well as the fact that I've unfortunately had some spine injuries, not related to HEMA incidentally, that have kept me basically, well, not on my feet for lots of the time. So I'm mostly past that. I've got my filming space back. There's a lot more reviews and a lot more informational videos coming soon. So I hope you enjoyed the video. Please do subscribe if you haven't already.